The man who took her didn't ask her name. That was the first thing Margot noticed. Not the gun. Not the black SUV idling at the curb with its plates covered. Not even the two men standing behind him like load-bearing walls in expensive suits. It was the fact that he looked at her the way you look at a package you've been waiting on. Checked, accounted for, already filed. She'd been walking out of the building on Pembina Highway, where she'd worked the night audit for 3 years. Her bag over one shoulder, her key fob in her hand, the parking lot lit by 2 functioning lights out of 6. Winnipeg in November smelled like exhaust and ice, and that particular flavor of cold that gets into the seams of your coat no matter how tightly you pull it. She didn't even have time to reach for her phone. The man, she would learn his name later, it would take her a while to say it without something clenching in her chest, had simply stepped into her path and said, "Get in the car." Not a question, not even a threat exactly, just a statement of the way things were going to be. "I think you have the wrong person," Margot said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his face, not doubt, not apology. More like a man recalculating a column of figures he thought he'd already balanced. "Margot Laine," he said, 26, night auditor. "You owe a debt that belongs to your sister." She didn't move. "I don't have a sister." A pause, brief, precise. "That's interesting," he said, "because she told us you do." His name was Corden, just Corden. No first name offered, no hand extended, no small civility of the kind that smooths over the jagged fact of what was happening. He sat across from her in the back of the SUV as it moved through the city she'd lived in her entire life, and he opened a slim leather folder across his knee, the way an accountant opens a ledger. She was, she understood, a number in someone else's book. Vivienne Laine borrowed $1.3 million from our organization over the course of 14 months, Corden said. She secured the loan using your name, your credit history. Your signature, which, I'm told, she forged convincingly. Margot stared at him. The city moved past the tinted windows. She watched the signs for the perimeter highway appear and recede. "I haven't spoken to Vivienne in 4 years. I know." He didn't say it unkindly. He said it the way you acknowledge a weather forecast. Accurate, impersonal, already factored in. "She anticipated you'd say that. Then you know I'm not responsible for her debt. Legally, probably not." He closed the folder. "In practice, you're what we have." She had worked night audit for 3 years. She'd learned to catch the errors that the day shift left behind. Transposed figures, misallocated accounts. The small frauds that people thought nobody would notice, because that nobody was looking at 2 in the morning. She had the kind of mind that found patterns in numbers the way other people found shapes in clouds. She wasn't afraid of being in the dark. She was afraid of sloppy arithmetic. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Corden looked out the window. "That," he said, "is what I'm going to find out." The house was north of the city, past the point where the suburbs gave up pretending to be the city and became something else entirely. Long driveways, tree lines that served as walls, that particular silence that money buys. It wasn't a mansion in the way people mean when they say the word. It was the kind of house that was simply sufficient in every direction simultaneously. Enough space, enough quiet, enough distance between itself and anyone who might have opinions about what happened inside it. Margot was shown to a room on the 2nd floor. The woman who showed her, middle-aged, efficient, the kind of person who moved through spaces as if she'd mapped them in advance, said only that dinner was at 7 and that she should stay on the 2nd floor until she was told otherwise. The room was nicer than her apartment. She sat on the edge of the bed and did not let herself cry. She'd learned young that crying was a resource, and resources were for when you actually needed them. She was not going to need them yet. She spent the first 2 hours taking inventory. The room had 1 window, 2nd floor, 12-foot drop to a side terrace, stone flagging below. 1 door, no lock she could use from the inside. A bathroom with a 2nd door that opened into a hallway she hadn't been shown. She checked every drawer, every shelf, every corner where a camera might be positioned and wasn't. Whoever had set this room up had done it to be comfortable, not to be monitored. That told her something. She was sitting at the small desk with a pad of paper from the nightstand. She'd been making notes in the margins of her own thinking, the habit of the night auditor who doesn't trust her own memory, when the door opened. Corden didn't knock. "Dinner," he said. "It's 5:43. He paused. He. So there was a he. Corden, she understood, was not the principal. She set down her pen. "I'd like to know what, exactly, I'm expected to do here." "You're expected," Corden said, "to have dinner." The man at the head of the table was not what she'd imagined, though she hadn't let herself imagine too specifically, because imagination was another resource, and she was rationing carefully. He was older than Corden. Late 30s, possibly older, in the way that men who've lived hard in expensive clothes tend to obscure the actual number. Dark hair going grey at one temple, a scar along his jaw that hadn't been set quite right, old, healed badly, the kind of thing you get when you can't go to a hospital. He was reading something on his phone when she came in, and he didn't put it down immediately. She was left standing in the doorway for 4 seconds before he looked up. His eyes were the particular grey of Lake Winnipeg in October. They took her in the same way Corden's had, as a figure in a column, a variable to be assigned. "Sit down," he said. His name, she would learn over the course of the next 3 days, was Beckett. That was what everyone called him. Staff, the rotating cast of men who came and went from the house on various errands, Corden himself. No first name in circulation. Just Beckett, said in the tone people use for weather systems and court dates and other forces that simply are. She sat. "Your sister," he said without preamble. "Stole from me, my half-sister," Margot said, "and I haven't seen her in 4 years. I know." He set his phone down. "Corden told me you'd say that. It's true. Most things that people say in your position are true. That doesn't make them useful." He picked up a fork. "Eat something." She looked at the food. It was good food, the kind she didn't buy for herself, because she was still paying off the credit card debt from the year Vivienne had briefly moved into her apartment and systematically used every account she could access. She knew, intellectually, that eating was not capitulation. She ate. "What do you want?" she asked. Beckett cut his food with the precise economy of a man who doesn't waste motion. "Your sister took $1.3 million. I want it back." "She is," a pause, almost imperceptible, "not currently accessible," Gon said. Margot agreed. "So you took me instead. I took Elaine instead." He looked at her. "The question of what use you are is one I'm still determining." Margot set down her fork. "I'm a night auditor. I make $41,000 a year. I have $800 in savings and a car with 160,000 kilometers on it. I cannot give you $1.3 million. "No," Beckett said, "but you might be able to help me find it." The next 3 days were strange in the way that very wrong situations become strange when they persist long enough to develop a routine. She was not locked in her room. She was not threatened, exactly, though the presence of Corden and the 2 men she privately called the Brackets, always one on either side of any door she approached, communicated threat clearly enough without language. She was fed. She was given access to a laptop that had been, she quickly determined, scrubbed of any connection to the outside world beyond a curated set of financial databases. They wanted her to find Vivienne's money. This was, in its own way, almost funny. Finding things Vivienne had hidden was something Margot had been doing since she was 11 years old. Finding the grocery money their mother had left folded in the kitchen drawer. Finding the rent check that had been cashed and pocketed, finding the explanation for why the numbers never quite added up in the household where she'd grown up watching one person drain every account she touched and leave before the statement arrived. She was good at this. She had become good at this specifically because of Vivienne. She worked for 6 hours on the first day and found 3 shell accounts Vivienne had used as staging points. She showed them to Corden. He showed them to Beckett. Beckett came to her workspace, a room off the main hallway that had been set up with a second monitor and a decent chair, which she appreciated, and sat across from her and looked at the screen. "How did you find those?" he asked. "The naming conventions," she said. "She always uses variations of the same pattern. She's creative, but she's lazy. She changes the details, but not the structure." Beckett was quiet for a moment. She had learned that his silences were not empty. They were calculating, the way a pause between keystrokes is not inaction but processing. "You've done this before," he said. "I've been doing this since I was a child," she said. "She stole from our family for a decade before anyone believed me." He looked at her, not the ledger look this time. Something else, briefly, that she couldn't categorize. "Keep going," he said, and left. She found the 4th account on day 2 and the 5th on day 3. On day 4, Corden came to the workspace at 7 in the morning and said, "There's been a development." The development was this. Vivienne had, apparently, been telling people that Margot was Beckett's kept accountant, his problem solver, his woman, in the particular way that word operated in the circles Vivienne moved through. It was, Corden explained with his customary absence of affect, a story that had been circulating widely enough that 2 of Beckett's rivals had heard it. "And?" Margot said. And Corden said, "If those rivals believe you're nothing to Beckett, you become leverage. A way to pressure him." She understood the arithmetic immediately. "So I need to be something to him." "You need to appear," Corden said carefully, "to be something to him." She put down her coffee. "He knows about this. It was his idea." Beckett explained it himself that evening. In the same direct way he explained everything. No cushioning, no apology, just the structure of the problem and the proposed solution. "2 men are going to come to this house tomorrow evening for a meeting I cannot cancel. Both of them know your sister. Both of them will be looking for information about your status here." He sat across from her in the room where they'd had that first dinner, which had, without ceremony, become the room where they ate every evening. "It would benefit me significantly if they believed you were here by choice." Margot looked at him. "What does by choice mean in your world?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that acknowledged the precision of the question without being amused by it. "It means that you sit at this table and you eat and you speak when spoken to, and you look at me the way a woman looks at a man she has chosen to be beside. I don't know what that looks like." "Yes, you do," he said. "You've spent your life watching people perform belonging they didn't feel. You know exactly what it looks like." She did. He wasn't wrong. She'd watched Vivienne perform belonging her entire childhood, in their mother's house, in other people's houses, in rooms she had no right to be in. Margot had always been the one standing at the edge, watching the performance, cataloguing the tells. She could do this. She was good at it precisely because she'd never been able to do it herself. "Fine," she said. "What do I need to know about you?" He looked at her for a moment. Then, for the first time, he told her something that wasn't a directive or a fact about her sister's debt. He told her that he took his coffee without sugar, that he'd grown up in Saskatoon, that the scar on his jaw was from a knife and not a bottle, and that the distinction mattered to him without him being entirely sure why. She wrote none of it down. She didn't need to. She filed it the way she filed account numbers, precise, retrievable, stored against future need. "Your turn," he said. She told him she'd grown up in North Winnipeg, that she'd taught herself double-entry bookkeeping from a library book when she was 13 because it was the only way she could prove, on paper, that money was disappearing. That she drank her coffee with too much milk because she'd grown up stretching it. That she didn't own anything she couldn't fit in 2 bags, by habit, because Vivienne had taught her early that permanence was for people whose names were on the lease. He was quiet for a moment after she said that last part. "You should have things you can't pack," he said. It was such a strange thing for him to say that she almost didn't know how to file it. The men arrived the following evening. Their names were Palermo and Strecht, one who laughed too easily and one who didn't laugh at all, which she identified immediately as 2 different kinds of danger. They came with 2 associates each, and the particular energy of men who believe they're reading a room when they're actually being read. Beckett was exactly what she would have predicted. Composed, precise, almost bored. He sat at the head of the table with the quality of stillness that belongs to things that are actually dangerous, rather than things that are performing danger. Margot sat at his right. She did not perform. Performance was what Vivienne did. Broad strokes, high emotion, the kind of belonging that announced itself so loudly that nobody thought to look at the seams. Margot did something more difficult. She was simply present. She reached for the water glass without checking whether it was acceptable. She responded to Palermo's too easy laugh with a smile that stopped exactly where it needed to. When Strecht looked at her with the evaluating look of a man deciding what category to put her in, she held his gaze for 2 seconds and then looked at Beckett. And the look she gave him was the look of a woman checking in with someone she trusts in a room full of people she doesn't. She had not planned that look. It arrived naturally, which alarmed her briefly, and which she set aside to examine later. Beckett's hand moved to the table near hers. Not touching, just near, the declaration of proximity that didn't need to announce itself. Palermo's attention shifted. Strecht's evaluating look concluded. She was filed. After they left, Corden came to the doorway of the dining room and said something to Beckett in a low voice. Beckett nodded. Corden left. Beckett sat with his glass for a moment. "You're good at that," he said. "At pretending to belong somewhere I don't." He looked at her, at being in a room and understanding it. She picked up her own glass. "I've never been able to afford not to understand the rooms I'm in." He was quiet for a moment that had a different texture than his other silences. Then he said, "The 5th account you found, there's a 6th. I can see the outflow but not the destination. I need you to find it." Back to the ledger. She was not, she told herself, disappointed. "I'll need access to the secondary transit records," she said. "You'll have them tomorrow." She found the 6th account on a Thursday, in the grey early light of a Winnipeg November that had decided it was already winter. She found it because of a rounding error, a fraction of a cent, applied consistently across 47 transactions. That didn't belong to the exchange rate it was attributed to. Someone had been skimming, layering, building a secondary structure inside the primary one. It was the most sophisticated thing Vivienne had ever done, and for one strange moment Margot felt something almost like admiration, which she identified and set aside quickly. She printed the summary. She brought it to Beckett's office, which she'd only been in twice. A large room with a window facing the tree line, a desk that was actually clear of paper, which she'd noted as unusual among the powerful men she'd observed from the periphery of other people's lives. She put the printout on his desk. He read it. She watched his eyes move across the columns. "She built this over 11 months, Margot said. "The rounding errors are too consistent to be accidental." She was testing the tolerance threshold, looking for the point where it wouldn't trigger a review. She found it at this value. She pointed. Everything above that she moved in single transactions. Everything below she distributed. Beckett looked up from the paper. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. It was the first time he'd asked a question that wasn't about the work. She looked at him. "Because when this is over, I want to walk out of here. That's all. And," she said, because she was tired of performing things she didn't feel. "Because she took from me too. For 20 years, she took from me. The money in those accounts includes 2 years of wages I never saw, and a security deposit I never got back, and the $400 she borrowed the week before she disappeared, that I knew I'd never see and lent her anyway." She paused. "I want her to not win." Beckett looked at the printout for a long moment. "She won't," he said. She didn't know what he did with the information. She told herself she didn't need to know. She was the auditor. The finding was her part of the work. What happened downstream of the finding was not her column. She told herself this for 2 more days, and then, on the 3rd day, she was sitting in the workspace at 11 at night. She kept night auditor hours by habit, the day being somehow too loud and bright for work that required the particular focus of listening for what was wrong, and the door opened. Beckett stood in the doorway. He was in a different kind of dress than she'd seen before, not the suit, but something close to casual, which on him looked like a language he was still learning. He had a second coffee mug. He put it on the desk next to her. "You don't have to work tonight," he said. "I know." She looked at the mug. "What's in this?" "Too much milk," he said. She looked up at him. He didn't explain it, and she didn't ask him to. She picked up the mug. He sat in the second chair. The one she'd noticed was always angled slightly toward her workspace. which she'd filed and not examined too closely, and didn't speak. They sat that way for a while, in the quiet that northern winters make when they've fully committed to themselves. She thought about the 6 accounts, the rounding error, the 11 months of careful construction. She thought about Vivienne somewhere, believing she'd found a way through. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in a room she hadn't chosen, drinking coffee someone had made the way she made it, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could trace, that the arithmetic of a particular situation might actually be working in her favor. "What happens," she said, "when you find her?" Beckett was looking at the window. Outside, the trees were dark shapes against a darker sky. "That's not your column," he said. "I know." A pause. "I'm asking anyway." He looked at her. The grey October eyes, the bad scar, the stillness of something that had been through enough to know the difference between a threat and a fact. "I'll get what she owes," he said, "and then it'll be done. And me?" A silence, the kind that processes. "You've given me 6 accounts and a methodology I didn't have before," he said. "That clears a significant portion of the ledger." She looked at him. "I'm not on a ledger." "No," he said. Then, after a moment, "No, you're not." She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it, the way she filed the other things. The coffee with too much milk, the chair angled toward her, the 2 seconds on the first night when he'd looked at her, and something had recalculated behind his eyes. She filed it carefully, in the category of things that required more information before she knew what to do with them. She picked up her pen. He didn't leave. They sat in the winter quiet of the house north of the city, and the work continued, and the silence between them was the kind that had started, without either of them deciding it, to mean something. And somewhere, in a transit record she hadn't yet opened, was the 7th account.